So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May issue of the Better Leader Inner Circle. And today we have a special guest, a great friend of mine from seemingly a long time. I don't know, it's been years, I think, that we've crossed paths off and on, artist. And she's going to talk about a very important subject in hiring and bringing people into onto our teams and bring people in that we're specifically going to be talking about management and leadership people, but I think a lot of it is transferable to anybody. And so I also have a new promotion here. We have a special sponsor of the Inner Circle called StephenArmstrong.ca. The great people over there or here in this little room are sponsoring the Better Leader Inner Circle for all of your needs for management consulting, executive leadership coaching. And if you're looking for an entertaining thoughtful and participatory speaker for keynotes or workshops, the people at at StephenArmstrong.ca are happy to have a conversation with you about any of your needs to see if we can help. And if we can't help, we often know people who can. So that's the commercial component of our morning. And I'm going now. I think artists, I think I might have muted you, so I'm going to Oh, you're good?
I muted myself. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so here's the thing I'm going to tease artist about. She's happy. She's probably not, what was a bit late this morning because her voice is probably run raw after the Edmonton Oilers run for the Stanley Cup next level. I guess it's the semis, isn't it? The next round?
Yes. Yeah, we are.
Yeah, and as a longtime sorry, sad, depressed Leafs fan, I regretfully and ruefully will start cheering for the Oilers as they go for as the last Canadian team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And so yeah, so if she sounds a little raspy or a little raw, I think it's probably because she's been enjoying the playoffs a lot more than a Leafs fan has been. That's for certain.
For sure.
Yeah. So our artists, let's have a little introduction from you. If you're okay with it. So let's look back when you were 8 or 9 or 10 years old and a lovely little girl and wherever you grew up and you started looking around. I'm sure you didn't say, I want to be a senior leader in an executive search firm. So how did you get here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And you said you have some people from the Lower Mainland on there. So that's all I have to say about.
So for our American, the people aren't completely in the hockey fan. Edmonton put Vancouver out just recently, so there might be some hard feelings here on the.
Yeah. So I will not lie. I went through a very large gamut of emotions in about 45 seconds of devastation, fear, and then elation. And I have to admit, my family and I thought they were going to call the neighbors, like the cops were going to be called by our neighbors. We were just like, anyway, yes, I'm a big hockey fan. And if you know anything about Edmonton, we're a little nutty and I'm from Edmonton.
Yeah.
And so tonight is the start of the Western Conference final and it's going to be, we'll see what happens. Anything can happen now. It's in the playoffs. So, that's a great question, Steve. A lot of people ask, how on earth did you don't grow up thinking you're going to be a headhunter, which is, an old term that is used in our business. And it's, my career path to this is a little bit, it's probably the way it is for a lot of us in this world as we do something else and then we find ourselves here. And so I grew up in Edmonton. I born and raised in Edmonton, and in university I was involved in an organization called ISEC. I don't know if any of you know that. It's an international student organization. It is recognized by UNESCO as the largest student-run organization in the world, and it was founded in 1948. And its premise was to create better cultural understanding through work exchange opportunities for young people. And so it grew, and on a campus level, it was volunteer-based. So you would go out and meet with businesses to generate as many opportunities to bring in international students to work, not to study, but to work in almost like a co-op type environment. And then as many opportunities as you could create in your own local community for international students, that's as many local students that you could send away to other opportunities. So that exchange, not reciprocal, like, oh, this person came from Finland, that person goes to Finland, but that allows you to send that many Edmontonians, in my case, abroad. each country has a national office, and it does the training and the fundraising. And I was elected to be the president of ISEC Canada after I graduated from university, and I moved and lived in Toronto for 14 months on that contract and doing that work, and a lot of fund development, a lot of it's a charity, so a lot of fundraising and awareness. And then after managing the program for 5 years, I decided to go on and exchange myself. And so I found myself living in the Czech Republic in Prague, working for what is now known as Intact Insurance. It was known as the ING Group when I was there. And then I did that for a period of I was on a management trainee program, and part of my time was spent in HR and in recruiting, because I could speak English. I was doing their international recruiting. So I would be assessing people because I could speak English, and assessing their English. Like, that was my credentials. But hey, you just go with it when you're 23. And then when I came back to Edmonton in 2002, I basically decided that I had done a lot of fundraising in the nonprofit sector. Maybe that would be a place where I could find some work. It was a challenging time economically in 2002, especially after the .com, and in Alberta we were not doing well. And so I reached out to my business network from ISEC days, and I was hired as a fundraiser through an individual that was running a nonprofit organization. And I did that for about 2 years. But one of my mentors throughout university was a gentleman by the name of Darwin Park, who founded our firm, one of our founding, and I had lunch with him, and I said, I don't know if I want to do this forever. I think I need a career change. Darwin, what should I do? What should I be when I grow up? And he said, well, we're hiring. Why don't you come work for me? And I said, well, I don't know anything about search. Why would I do that? How can I do that? And he said, and I'll always remember this, he says, well, I was a gym teacher, and here I am. So, he said, Artis, you're good with people. You know how to do research. You're constantly looking at creating partnership opportunities. It's basically the same thing. You just translate it into that. And so that's 20 years ago, next month, that I've been with the organization, and obviously grown through the firm over 20 years, and became an owner and a partner about 11 years ago this fall. Nice. So the business and the industry has been good to me, and I find a lot of joy and value in what I do in supporting clients and candidates alike. So yeah, I didn't go to school to become a headhunter. I didn't think I was going to be, but most people in our business aren't. My business partner is a geologist. Another one was in hospitality. Another one was a banker. Another one worked in the IT space. We find that the broader business perspectives usually allow a lot of value to our clients. The more exposure we have to different sectors, the better off our clients are served. And so usually that's what you find is individuals that went through a different path to get to this space, because you don't think about it usually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I only know a few people in my life, or bumped into a few people in life that had, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be something, and made that happen through their career. Most of us have this circuitous, winding, mercurial route from wherever we started to, I think most people that would ever have known me when I was a young guy is 16, 17, 18, even in my early 20s, probably are shocked silly that where I ended up. So
Totally.
Most teachers didn't have any hope for me at all. Actually, I think I told you the story before. One of my high school teachers told me that if I wasn't going to do anything, I shouldn't do it there, and kind of walked me out the front door.
Oh my goodness.
Lucky for me, I went and joined the Canadian Army, and that opened up an education and a career that has sort of led me here. But yeah, there's no straight line. So Artis, we talked a wee bit before this, and so our last session was around how do you get ready to hire somebody? How do you think about it? How do you do the process? Even up to and including interviews and selection and sort of stuff. So, and I'm okay to cover some of that ground, but really I think what we want to talk about here is you found the person and you want them to be successful for all sorts of reasons, mostly because you need to be successful as the leader of the group, but you don't want to waste any human potential and destroy a human's life, because that happens if there's a mishire or whatever. So, so talk to me about that, even if you want to backtrack a wee bit, that's cool too. But you're narrowing it down. Maybe you got a candidate or two that you want to considering bringing in, and so that you're making that this final sort of decision, and then we want to set this person up for success. And before you start, I just want this is not a lecture for everybody out there. If somebody wants to ask a question or jump in, it's not that big a crowd. Feel free. If you want to be polite, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. And if not, you can just take your chances and interrupt and ask the question that you're interested. So go ahead, artist. Like, we're here now. We've got one or two really first crackerjack candidates we're super happy with. We want to bring one or maybe both into our company or organization, and we want everyone to be successful. So maybe start from that place.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that whole process, and that's where, my business spends a lot of time, right, is getting us to that stage of making a decision.
Yeah.
I always say there's a lot of that engagement and buy-in with current team members when you're making these decisions and when you're going through a recruitment process.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that's happened, because if that's happened, then usually the ability to have success after increases dramatically, because again, usually we want this to work. And the challenge sometimes is if a team doesn't feel included in the decision, then they don't want it to work. So it's just, that psyche that occurs. And so having that engagement. And so the other thing I always say, especially we're mainly working at an executive or senior leadership level when we're supporting our clients. And so these are individuals that are then going to come in and make decisions and be in a position of authority, usually leading people, and not even just leading people, leading leaders. Usually that's the individuals that we're dealing with. And so that's a very delicate balance too, right? So there's a couple of things that I also say in that process before you make the final decision that I think helps as we go forward is there's got to be more than one touch point before you make a recruitment decision with an executive like that. There's got to be two or three. I really enjoy the last one to be something that is social, something where we're not in a formal, a bit contrived. Interviews are a bit contrived, right? Like they feel a bit like, we're all on our best behavior, wearing our nicest things and our hair is done and whatnot. So, and that's not how we operate every day, right? Like that's not our usual selves. One thing that I have taken from the pandemic that I think is a great carry forward. So when this all started happening and, you couldn't have people meet each other, and it, that was sort of a bit terrifying to hire your CFO and you haven't even met them. And so I just didn't buy into that. I'm like, we can still have people meet. How can we do this? And so I started to really encourage my clients to go for walks with their candidates.
Oh, so interesting.
Go for a walk. You're outside. No one is taken outside away from us. We can still go outside, get a coffee. You don't have to be dressed up for that. You're going for a walk. Wear comfortable shoes. I'm in Edmonton, and if it was February, you got to have a toque on. Like you're not going to look your best, right? Kind of idea. I said, so go for a walk and have a conversation. And the old adage of, if you want to get a teenager to talk to you, go for a drive, right? That's what they say, because you're not looking at each other. The same thing happens on a walk. You're not looking at each other. You're with each other. You're together, but that sort of tension of staring at one another is dissipated. And so, I had the CEO of an organization. We were doing their CFO, and she was like, I need to meet them. What can I do? And so I said, go for a walk. And she goes, that doesn't seem very professional, artists. And I said, well, it's what we have. So let's do it. And I just had lunch with her a couple of months ago, and she goes, I do that all the time now. That's what I do. It's a walk is built into the process for all of our executive recruitments. I learned more on a walk with these three candidates because we did it with three. I don't think you have to do it with three now because you're meeting them, but we didn't. It was all on screen until that last moment. And she said, my decision changed. I walked into those walks thinking I had this person in mind. And after the walk, I changed my mind. I learned more in that 60 minutes on a walk than I probably learned from executives in the first 2 to 3 weeks with them, because they were more vulnerable. They were more willing to share and all of those kinds of things. And I think that if you have that vulnerability and you have that desire and that understanding of purpose, it goes a long way in engaging them in the next phase, right?
Right.
So how are you then successful? So I've carried that through to tell candidate or clients this, how do we create success for this executive? And I've said, have them have social interactions with the people that they're going to be their peers, one-on-one in the first 2 weeks, just one-on-one, go for a walk, go for a coffee, that kind of thing, to create that vulnerability with each other, that we're all, pardon that we hate saying that now, right? But we're all in this together, like, that kind of concept, right? So that's an advice I provide. And I also think it's really what I say to candidates is, I said, if you're going to be leading a team of directors or senior managers, it's also to create a social interaction very early on in your first 3-4 weeks. You should have a social interaction. If you can do it one-on-one, that would be great. It's not always possible, I realize, with time, but in a team and dynamic as well. Again, because if you create shared experiences and some fun, I find that goes a long way in people, navigating, the old adage of people will stay for an A team and a B job,
Yeah.
but they'll leave
Right.
an A job for a B team. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that same kind of concept, right? So if you create that shared experience with one another early on, lots of studies show that connection, that desire to be together and work with one another is very high, right?
It's so
And
interesting.
so those are things that I think help. I think if you've gone and had some of this buy-in along the way, right, before you get to that part, if you've had this buy-in along the way, you're going to have even better success, right?
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
people feel engaged, I mean, I'm the first to say that you don't, and pardon if this comes across a little trite, but you don't get to pick your boss, right? Like that
Right.
doesn't always happen. But you should be allowed to inform what we think the individual should be and what they're bringing to the table. So if you're part of those conversations of developing the job description or, that kind of idea, that's what I mean by buy-in. I'm not necessarily saying they get to be engaged in the interview stage, but they get to be engaged in informing the leadership of what will be helpful. And that allows them to be heard, right? So
Yeah.
then, if there's that respect there, then the next phases of the individual reaching out and whatnot. I
So
also,
we're, I'm
oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just want to pick up on that theme there. So how would you recommend to people to engage? So say you're bringing a leader of a team. It could be a team of other leaders, or it could be just a team. How would you suggest that team be engaged so that they do feel heard in the process? They feel
Mm.
have maybe some input in what they'd like to see as a boss. Uh, like what's a respectful way to engage people? Like to me, I think you need to tell people this is how this is what your input will be. You don't have the final word on this, but we want to hear from you. So you
Yes,
create proper expectations so nobody's
100%.
disappointed. But
Yeah,
like what kind of questions what you say, hey, look, we're looking for a new team lead, a director of finance or a CFO, I don't know what, pick a job.
yeah,
And you're important to this.
yeah. There's some questions to ask is, how does this role make your job easier, right? How
Mhm.
is this role going to allow you to be more successful? What are the things that happen in this role to do that? What are the things that can sometimes make it harder?
Yeah.
Where are the roadblocks? So it's asking different questions, usually not just what do you want in an next CFO?
Yeah.
It's more asking about them, how that role connects with them. So that's that in the working situation.
Yeah.
If there's been a retirement, if there's been a parting, if something like that has happened, it's also really great to get a perspective of their view of the current state of the team and of the organization. Sometimes leaders and boards learn things when we talk to the middle or the frontline staff
Yeah.
to do that. And I always say, some focus groups around that is talk about the current state. How are things going? Where are we adding value? What's going well? Where are the gaps and challenges from your perspective? They may
Mhm.
not be the same as everybody's, but that will also inform, how are we going to mitigate these gaps with this hire? Like, how can we do that? How can this person navigate some of those things? But it's
Right.
also that personal, like, how does this role impact you? Like, how does the CFO impact your day to day? And if the person is saying, well, not at all, then there's a question, okay, this probably wasn't positive before.
Yeah.
Okay, why do you say, you got to dig in a little bit, right? And do that. I appreciate you can't talk to everybody. Like
Yeah.
it depends on the size of the organization, right? You can't talk to everybody. So is it taking a sample and asking people? It's also asking, like, would you like to be involved in this, right? Some people just don't choose to be, and that's okay. I think you're usually surprised at actually who puts their hand up sometimes.
Yeah.
At least that's the experience I've had with clients. They're like, oh, I didn't think Jack would want to jump into that. Okay, great. And so it's good to allow people to participate, but you don't have to force them. And Steve, 100%, you have to set the expectations. We're seeking your feedback because we're trying to make the most informed decision we can. It's our decision. It's my decision.
Yeah.
I'm the one that has to live with the decision, but I really want to make sure I'm listening and learning to those around me before I make the final decision. Even when I'm working with really large, publicly funded organizations that have big committees,
Yeah.
14 people around a table, I'm the one that always says, this is Steve's decision, and Steve is very much looking forward to your feedback.
Mhm.
Right. And it's important to set that stage, because if it comes down, and I really try hard not to have a vote or any of those kinds
Great.
of things. Like it's how do you see candidate A adding value? Where do you think there might be gaps and challenges? That's the debrief. And then Steve takes that away, and Steve goes, okay, I can live with these gaps, and this is the value I need. I'm going to talk to candidate B. That makes sense to me. Right. So those are the ways that you can engage people.
Yeah.
Because if they feel heard,
Right.
then and if they trust the organization and they're, a fairly engaged employee, then they'll feel like, okay, this person is trying their best. Everyone goes to work to try their best.
Yeah.
And so there might be misses, right? In those first 100 days, that first 100 days, we always say, the books about it, there's a reason why those first 100 days are so important. But I think that the other thing that this is where I was going before, the other thing that is on the onus of the hiring organization to the candidate is to really, I think we were talking about this, Steve, the last time we chatted. Like, my job, as I say to my clients, for clients, the organization hiring is my client, and that's my responsibility. But I care about my candidates too, and I always say I have to be strategically transparent. That's my job. Right? Of course, there are things that you can't share if you're not an employee to an individual. You just can't, like legally and fight all that kind of stuff. But we have to provide them enough insight to know what they're walking into. And once that decision has been made, they have to really be given a fulsome picture of where there are gaps, where there are challenges. You really need to set them up for success to understand. And they know nothing is perfect that they're walking into. Should know that. If they don't, then there's a big surprise. But if they're aware of some of those minefields a little bit and challenges, it's helpful.
So what would be, if you were the incoming person, the preferred candidate, let's say that, what are some of the most interesting questions that person has asked you about the hiring company or organization?
I mean, there's the usual suspects of culture and this and that and the other.
Yeah.
I think somebody who's very insightful will be like, well, how are decisions made in this organization?
Yeah.
How do they make decisions? What's the process of that? And honestly, to me, how a decision is made and how information flows through an organization actually dictates cultural behaviors, right? Is speed important? Is collaboration important? Is competition important? All of those things usually, and none of them are bad. Like, sometimes competition is needed in a culture, sometimes, right? Nothing is right or wrong, but usually how information is flowed and how decisions are made in an organization really drives behavior and drives culture. And that will resonate with some people and not with others, right? Some people thrive in a very, I think of a very sales-driven organization. Some people thrive in competition, right? Are we compete, like those kinds of things, right? Some people don't. They thrive in a more collaborative environment. Nothing is right or wrong. And it's really important for candidates to understand what they're walking into. I think I told Steve the story about the recruitment I did. This is going back about 15 years for an organization, a very heavy industrial organization that required a general manager, PN, all the things, big job. And I was talking with the owner of the organization and going through everything and getting all the understanding. Okay, it was a technical role too. So the technical requirements, the sector, all that stuff. And literally he was walking me out the door and he says, oh, and they have to wear a suit and tie to work every day. And I went, in Alberta, in an industrial place, people have worn suit and tie to work in a long time. It's not that, this isn't, you know, the financial sector or account, whatever. I sort of went, and he was very well dressed. I will say that. I just thought he was dressing up for me. I wear my suit whether I'm going into a warehouse or into a boardroom. That's just who I am. You know, I'm happy to put a hard hat on, no problem. And I said, oh, really? And he goes, yeah, it's important to me. And he goes, you can put your coveralls over that if you have to walk around the shop floor, but you're representing me and wearing a suit and tie is important. Or he goes, or, you know, appropriate attire for women, like whatever it is, but that's, you know, business, it's business attire in my office, not business casual, business.
Yeah.
I said, okay, if that's important to you, okay. And we had to communicate that to candidates, and that told a story of the culture as well, right? Wasn't right, wasn't wrong, it was what it was. And we had people withdraw from a process because they said, I don't want to wear a suit and tie to work. I know it sounds really silly, but it was what they wanted to live with. And they're like, that's just not the culture I want to be a part of. No problem. So those are things that I think, that's why I say the casual is important, because people will always wear a suit or business attire to an interview. 9 times out of 10 in a professional executive leadership role, they're going to wear that, right?
Yeah.
You assume that I've just done that for, you know, I went out for, you know, I dressed up for family Thanksgiving dinner. That's what I did. But, you know, on Monday, I'm just going to wear, you know, business casual. Like, I'm not going to show up in, you know, flip-flops and a hoodie,
for certain.
but I am not necessarily going to be in that business attire, right? So that's why that casual or that more informal interaction is important, because then we can see how we all are together in regularity, right? So those are those little things actually, we don't realize, I think, impact corporate culture more than you know, more than anything. And so those are the things that we have to share.
Yeah.
And that's my job as a client, like for clients, that's what I have to share with candidates, because I want them to feel that they have, you know, this is the other thing. As a hiring organization, you always have to remember that they are assessing you as much as you are assessing them. Right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, the other thing I always say to people, everyone always wants an advice on that last interview. Like, what should I do, Ernest? What should I do? And it sounds so silly and people kind of laugh, but it's important. Just be yourself. Everybody should be themselves. Because if you aren't yourself and they hire that, you have to be that every day. And that's exhausting. Right.
Tiresome,
And the same thing for the team. Be yourself, because if you are something different and the person says yes, and then you kind of revert to the way you know, your comfortable self, it's exhausting, right? And so, you know, at the end of the day, I always say, for the most part, there's no right corporate culture. There is a corporate, you know, I mean, obviously there are some things from a legal perspective, all that, but, you know, like I said, a competition in sales culture, that's not bad. If that's required for your business, that's okay, but that is not for everyone, right? And the same thing for something that's a little bit more collaborative and maybe a little bit, you know, not, I don't want to say slow moving, but a little bit more methodical, right? That again can drive some people, you know, up the wall, like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to, I'm more decisive, right? So all of those things should be shared, you know, and how you make decisions and how you move information through an organization usually are the 2 things that can really demonstrate corporate culture. How money is made, how people are paid, all of those things drive behaviors. And so that is also something that, you know, if it's a unionized environment, if it's a non-unionized, like all of that will drive if somebody will be, and if they have that information and they know that before they make the decision, usually it also goes better, right? All those things.
So this is day 1. Steve shows up to work for Artis. I got my suit on because I heard the message. And I got my lunchbox and I got my briefcase with a brick in it, so it looks heavy, so I look important. And I show up at whatever time somebody told me to be there, and I probably came early because they didn't want me there at 8:30 because they wanted to have their coffee and go for the bathroom, but I showed up at 8:25 because it's the first day and I'm a keener. How do we make me successful when I walk in that door that morning
Yeah. I mean,
Scared because you're scared a little
you
bit,
are
of
scared.
course.
You're
You have to
apprehensive.
be.
You're nervous. Yeah.
Yeah,
All the
yeah.
things for
And
sure.
they're worried and
Yeah.
they
Did we
lots
make the right
going
decision?
on, lots of
Yeah.
emotions in play here. How do we make this person me successful walking in the door day one?
Yeah, we've all, I mean, myself as an employer has made these mistakes, right? You think
Yeah.
you're ready, but you're not. Like that little check, like get a checklist together. Like, do they have their phone? Do they have their screens? Do
Yeah.
they have all of these things? You know, if you can ask those questions before they start, like in terms of how they want their setup, whether it's a virtual setup or not, like whatever that looks like, make sure that physically the things they need to do their job are ready and they're set up, because
Yeah.
that is just so disheartening for somebody to come and their email isn't set up,
Yeah.
or they're like, it sounds so silly, but we've done that. Like you think, oh, we have time. And then all of a sudden the day before it's not ready. Right. So try to really plan for that. You know, I call it like an onboarding checklist
Right.
of the physical things, like, you know, what are they going to need to do this role? And there's a bunch of tech with that and all of those kinds of things. Is that all established? Like, you know, how do we chat in our office? What do we do? The MS Teams, what is it? You know, what are
Yeah.
the things that we do, especially now with, since pandemic, there's so many more virtual tools like
Right.
that we have. If there's any, you know, it's funny, this is a one that I like die on, but in certain organizations, they're on a Google platform. Is
Right.
anybody on Google platform in this on this screen? I hate
I'm not sure.
tell
Yeah.
people I say that, but
Yeah,
you know,
we
if
run
it's
on
children,
Rumble.
There's a couple. Yeah.
yeah,
I know
and
Morgan
so
is. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and so it's a different world, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I had this executive who had been on a Google platform for like 15 years, and then they went to a Microsoft platform. And they were like, I felt like a 5-year-old. I was like, how do I make a document? Like, you know, just little, and this was an executive. And so it's even little things like that to say, oh, you're coming from this environment, you're an Apple, whatever it is. You should know that ahead of time. And so those are the little checklists, right? Like the little, you know, should we have a little tutorial plan for that person for their first day, or even the day before they start, or 2 days before? Here's a virtual to give you a refresher so you don't feel so disadvantaged. So the physical things, that day one is so that they walk into the space that they're going to be in, whether it's a virtual space or it's a physical space, or if it's a combination thereof, that they have the resources required and they're there. They're already there and they're set up. That would be the first thing. And I know it sounds simple, but I think we sometimes forget.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we're rushing, and then it's like, oh yeah, here you go. And we shove them in a corner, and then, yeah, we're plugging things in that morning they start. And it's a little disheartening to be like, well, didn't you want me here? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
were you
yeah.
ready for
I
me?
I
You know?
work I work for an organization that had a lot of swag, and we always made sure that the new person was gifted some swag on the first days because they didn't, so they weren't out of place, right? And they were looking around, go, everybody else has a vest. How do I get a vest? And it's
Yeah,
some,
exactly. And or
yeah,
a coffee mug, or like, just,
yeah,
I know
yeah,
it sounds little, but those are
yeah,
things from a human being's perspective, as though they were ready for me. They were excited for me to be here,
yeah.
right?
Artist, I see Todd come on screen.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have a comment or
I
question
do.
or
Just this conversation spurs just a thought or a practice that I've seen and sometimes have used, and that is in interviewing or getting a final candidate. Along the way, I'll ask, hey, when you've had a good day or you want to celebrate something, how do you treat yourself?
oh,
And I'll make
nice.
a note of that. And then on
Yeah,
their first day, I may have that on their desk. So I may find out that, hey, this person really likes flowers, or you know what? This person celebrates by a Snickers bar or
yeah,
whatever it is, and just have that on the desk when they come, along with a
nice.
card that
That's
says, "Hey,
very thoughtful.
welcome," that
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah,
It's a
Yeah.
small little thing. In addition to everything you're talking about, being sure that they have all the tools and equipment, and their name tag is on the desk. I mean, all those
that's
pieces,
right.
business
100%.
cards are ready to go. All that I think is key as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know I've often coached people to take a notebook with them when they're walking around talking to people, and like if they got kids in soccer, you hear about a soccer tournament this weekend, then remember to loop back on next Tuesday
Oh
and
yeah.
ask how the soccer tournament went. And the same thing when you're onboarding somebody, if you know a bit about their family, you can kind of connect those previous conversations so that people believe that you were listening to them, not just
Well,
think you were listening to them, but believe.
for sure.
Yeah,
And the
that's
other,
a great point, Todd. Thank you.
And that goes to the other thing about that social connection. If you can do that on the first day, even if it's a stand-up coffee with people, you know, and so that everyone is aware that, you know, Todd is starting that day or what have you. So it's a little like, it's not a lot. It's 15, 20 minutes. And you just do that little kind of stand up. How's it going? If one or two people can, you know, either take them for lunch or something like that as well, just to spend some time with them again in that social connection. I find that's always just so, it just sets the stage of, you know, psychologically the person feels they were ready, they were excited, and they want me here, right? And so all of those things are important.
Welcoming, right?
Yes.
So we get them in the first day. Steve shows up the first day. I got my Snickers bar and my flowers because I like flowers too. Who knows? Sometimes. I know I'm in trouble, really in trouble, when somebody's super nice to me, especially at home. Something's up, new furniture is coming, or something else is happening. And we like this whole exercise we're talking about this morning is to make sure everybody involved with this exercise, this is going to be successful. So how do we make sure that Steve is not going to get off the rails? Because more often than not, it's lack of supervision. When I say that, I mean, you know, the right touch sort of level of supervision for an executive or a manager or anybody. But, you know, often people get in trouble because in the military, we call it left and right arcs of fire. So you're not allowed to shoot over too far left and too far right. And it keeps you focused on what's important. So how do I, as a leader, or even as a candidate or a new hire coming in, make sure I understand that so I don't get in too much trouble too quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are, you know, from an onboarding perspective, I mean, these are things that what I'm saying, I'm sure everyone has heard and believes, but you know, if you're coming in as an executive, it's not wise to make many decisions in the first 100 days. It's learn, it's listen, it's respect, and then it's act. You know, like those are usually the things, because don't forget, we're hiring this person because we hope they're bringing a new perspective. But what we have been doing is not terrible, and we've been functioning well for X amount of years or whatever it looks like. So that individual, it's that two-way street of learning, listening, also together. It's expectation setting, and that goes back to when we're doing our recruitments with folks. You know, we call it an opportunity profile, not a job description. So we've developed this opportunity profile. This is what this looks like. And it's making sure that those are the expectations of the position, and of what we're seeking from that individual. And so it's having that dialogue with that person, setting the stage of expectations. Again, you know, to Todd's point, it's understanding their preferences and tendencies. How do you want to be communicated with? Are you someone, you know, simple as, you know, if it's urgent, do you like a text or you like an email? Like what do you like? You know, and as the leader leading this individual, it's usually onus on you a little bit sometimes to be flexible, right? You know, that kind of thing. But it's also, you know, I always say it's your job to share. Like, I prefer if it's something quick that I get a text, I don't need it in my inbox, or a direct message in terms of MS, you know, whatever it is. Those are the little things that start to get annoying as you go forward. So it's expectation setting, communication, you know, how are we going to communicate? How often are we going to communicate? And understanding that it's a learn, it's a listen, it's a respect on both sides, and then it's acting, right? So I don't think you can, I mean, I was just having this conversation. We've onboarded some new staff in our organization as well. And I always say, my expectation is that they're really learning, listening, and observing for 3 to 4 months. Like I'm not, you know, I temper those expectations too as a leader. Like, I can't, if someone's expecting this person to come in and dramatically, you know, make your life easier in a second, well, that's not fair, right? You know, that's not a fair expectation. So you have to have those expectations of yourself as an organization and as a hiring leader too, of what is realistic for this individual to be able to do and accomplish in various milestones, right? Usually at 3 months, usually at 6 months, right? And I would say at 6 months, the individual, even an executive leader, at 6 months is usually the moment in time when they are, you know, kind of navigating through things and are able to make those decisions and have the clarity to do that, because they just don't have the information yet, and it's just
Right.
absorbing.
It's so interesting. Yeah, I can remember I was hired into an organization, and the guy that hired me was a great guy. Got along really well with them. And then one day he phoned me up and he says, Steve, I seldom hear from you. And I says, John, the reason you don't hear from me is when you do hear from me, I need you. like, like I'm happy to have a conversation anytime, but when I phone you or get in touch with you, you will know that I need you, and it's important, right? So it's kind of that creating that two-way expectations a bit too.
Totally. I mean, that's it. Like I always say, just in the same as in the recruitment process, when I'm reminding clients, they're assessing you as much as you're assessing them.
Yeah.
The same thing goes forward, right? You need to be engaged in this relationship as much as they need to. It's giving knowledge, it's giving grace, it's giving time and space, and all of these kinds of things on both sides
Right.
to make it through, and not to be hasty and all of that.
Yeah. So one of the other things, I've coached lots of people, especially in middle management roles, even senior roles, is to understand. So how do I understand my boss's performance objectives? Because rapidly and suddenly their performance objectives should become my performance objectives to support that. So what would you say about setting up that conversation? So when even maybe it's a before the hire date, like what is it? What are your performance? I remember I had this conversation with somebody one time, and no employee, nobody, a direct report had ever asked her what her performance objectives were. And
Wow.
yeah, so I'll wander off and do my own thing, but if I don't understand what you need to get done, then we're gonna have a bump somewhere along the way, right?
Yeah, for sure. I also think it's important. It depends on the size of the organization.
Sure.
I don't know on this screen, big, large, complex organizations, publicly funded, private sector.
Yeah.
Like it really depends on the layers and whatnot. But I really think it's important for hiring leader or a leader of individual to be as transparent as they can with individuals. Here are my burdens.
Yeah.
Here are my pressures. Here are my, powers that be are pushing on me. And here are my deliverables. This is when I have to have things done. And here's where I see you inserting into that and supporting. Am I right? Am I wrong? I literally had a conversation this morning with one of my team members saying, well, I thought I made that perfectly clear. And I said, this is what you said in the conversation. And they looked at me and they went, yeah, but I didn't mean that. I'm a literal person. I'll take things at face value. So I need to know, I'm usually, maybe I'm not, like people call me out on that. Well, Artist, you didn't say that. I didn't. Okay. I thought I did.
Yeah.
And so it's about trying to be clear with each other about, especially in performance and targets and whatnot, what are the objectives that we each have to achieve to get to the outcome, and how do we support one another to do that? And so I think a lot of times, when things go off the rails, it's work pressures that, deadlines aren't met. And if a deadline isn't met by this person, then I can't meet my deadline, right?
Sure.
The way information again and work flows through an organization, if it's flowing usually sort of up to the end, if you will, if you aren't meeting this target here, and there's probably a wide variety of reasons, like I'm not saying the person isn't trying, but then it's about saying that right away. I know you need this on this day by this point in the month, but there is no way because of ... right? Some of it's personal. There's a personal challenge for the individual. We have to have grace and respect that, right? Okay, thank you for telling me. I appreciate that. What can we do to help you get to those deliverables, right?
Interesting.
And so that's kind of that conversation. But usually that's where it falls off the rails, is because we think, we assume, we should never do, that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, or that I communicated it clearly. So again, that goes back to the communication expectations. I find I, of course, in my office have different team members that support me on different things. And each of them have a different way, that not totally, but slight nuances of communication.
Right.
Some of them are very verbal and we have a conversation and it's fine. And some of them are much more, either visual, so they needed to see it, right? And so sometimes I'm sending emails and this in point form, and sometimes I'm literally just having more conversations. Depends on
Yeah.
the person.
So what is your thoughts on psychometric analysis, like DISC, or I know Myers-Briggs is sort of taking a burden on, I'm not sure is 100% fair on the whole thing, but it's not my favorite model. But, you know, are those things useful early on to set people up for better success? Do you?
Yeah, I prefer, so it's funny, a lot of people want us to use them in the hiring process, and we
Yeah.
have, and I've done them all, DISC, colors,
Yeah, sure.
MPI, you know, they all provide some insight, and I
Yeah.
don't say that they don't. So,
Yeah.
you know, we use in our office for the most part something called PXT Select.
Yeah.
We find it useful. I don't want to say they're all the same. They're not. There's differences. Why we like PXT Select is the way it's communicated, the report is very easy to read. And I think
Right.
that's actually what's important is can the user use it? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's very scientific
Oh, and
or
dense,
or
often very
psychiatric,
dense.
and
Yeah.
so you can't understand unless you have, you know, a real understanding in the tool. It's hard
Right.
sometimes to really know how to use it. So PX is very, I don't want to say layman's, but it really is easy to read. It's
Yeah.
really easy to understand. You can see how it's useful, and so that's why we have used it. But I always caution our clients that you don't use this as a hiring decision. It's enhancing your process, right?
Right.
Each hiring, it's a moment in time. The resume is a moment in time. The first conversation is a moment in time. References are a moment, and then you build all these moments in time to make a final decision and confirm impressions.
Okay.
Where I find behavioral testing helpful is once you've hired and you do it with the whole team.
Right.
So your team will already have done theirs, right? And then this person can do theirs as well. And then you can share, you know, Steve is a red, or, you know, Denise is a green, or like what.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Oh, that's Steve likes to be communicated in this way. And Denise, you know, it's
Yeah.
always like, oh, I didn't know that, Denise. That's interesting. Thanks
Interesting.
for sharing that. And so I find that it's actually more useful in the so we have always said to our clients is we're happy to use this tool in the process, but it shouldn't make your decision. And the way I go with it is like if we're using MBTI, terminology, you know, it's a simple one, but I always say everyone, you know, I'm hiring a VP of sales. They can't, you know, how could they be introverted?
Yeah.
I'm like, some of the best sales executives are introverts because
Yeah.
they listen, they observe behavior, they take in information, and then they act.
That's right.
Sometimes extroverts, me, very extroverted, talk over people, and I'm not always observing behaviors, and that's not, a salesperson should be observing behavior. So I always say it doesn't matter. Those things shouldn't matter about the final outcome, but they also shape how the person will be in the job.
Right.
So that's why I find them very useful in a team because, and that's the nice thing about the PX team report is it actually develops a team report.
Right.
So you get this team report and you can see where everybody's styles and preferences and tendencies are on a spectrum as a team.
Yeah.
And so it's quite interesting to sort of see, oh, that's why.
That's why. Yeah.
That's why.
So interesting. Yeah.
You know.
So, artists, we're running up about 5 to 12. We got 20 minutes left for people's time and your valuable time, of course. But I want to ask the question that nobody wants to ask, maybe nobody wants to think about. So it's gone badly or going badly. And while we're talking about this, I'd like just to encourage the people online, if you do have a question or comment for artists or just either put your hand up, jump in the chat, and when we're done this question, we'll open it up for maybe if somebody has any thoughts. So it's going poorly. I hired this person in, and you know, I'm starting to hear rumblings, and I'm not sure if this is the right fit. What do you do? How long do you let this go? I hate the term hire slow, fire fast, because what we're talking at this stage, we're talking about somebody that's probably given up a big job, a big career to make a jump, maybe a move. You got family. Now we're talking pride and emotions and future earnings, and there's all this coming into play. And we might even like the person, which is terrible, right? Because now we like the person and we got to make a hard decision at some point. So talk to me about that a little bit. Like, what's that? I know you'd be likely be involved because I know if people aren't aware, most executive search firms put a warranty on this person. So you have you're vested financially into the success of this person.
For sure. Yeah,
Um,
we guarantee our work depending on the level, anywhere between sort of 12 and 24 months.
Yeah.
And so, for a CEO, it's usually 2 years. For a very seasoned executive, it's 18 months. For directors or senior managers, it's about 12.
yeah.
And that should be enough time for our clients to really get to know a candidate and to be able
Yeah.
to say, yes, they're with us. So yeah, you're right. I don't like working for free, Steve. It's really not fun.
It sucks, doesn't it?
And so I work, we work really hard on that front end piece to make sure that we know the expectations of candidates, of clients. I've said to a candidate, I said, actually, the more you talk to me, I don't think you should apply for this. I don't think it's for you because
Yeah.
what you're telling me isn't resonating. Like, here are the gaps, here's where the culture might be off, or it's just a misalignment. And then again, it's not bad. Just don't think it's for you, because again, I don't want them to leave something and then be unhappy. So that is, but it happens, right? It does happen. And so, I love what you just said, because I hate that, like, hire slow, fire fast. I don't know. Because what I say in my business is there's a fine line between moving too fast and moving too slow.
Right.
If you take a very long time in a search process and you demonstrate that you're not that decisive, you actually lead candidates to believe that you don't like making decisions.
Yeah.
And that's also another thing. So you've got to, like, don't get me wrong. You don't just like, oh, let's hire Steve. I met him today. He's great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a little
Well,
bit.
I am.
Yeah, you are great. But that's a little bit like, whoa, really? Are we sure? But once you've gone through your methodical process and you've had your conversations and whatnot, and you're there, I always say to a client, if they don't want to, like, I had one of these last week, they are like, I always say sometimes people are waiting for perfection, right? They're waiting for perfection, which does not exist.
Yeah.
And so I always say, well, no decision's a decision. And they don't like that. Well, no, I didn't make a decision. Exactly. That's a decision. That means this role was not important enough to make a decision. You're not experiencing enough pain or pressure in your organization.
Yeah.
The position actually isn't adding value. That's what you're telling me right now. When you put it that way, they suddenly want to make a decision. Or they don't. Like, I have clients go, you know what, Artis, maybe we should put this on hold. We actually don't. Maybe you're right. Maybe we don't need this right now. Okay, fair. Totally fair. So that's that's on the side of that. But if it's misaligned, you came in and it's misaligned, I think that you owe it to everybody to take a breath and to have some conversations. Sometimes part of our support to clients is, like, I always like to do check-ins, milestone check-ins, usually at 4 weeks, at 3 months, at 6 months, but I want my client and my candidates to feel that they can call me at any time, oh, this isn't going well, or I'm having a concern, or what have you. And sometimes it's having a facilitated third-party discussion, right? So sometimes I have been in those discussions where I've said, Denise, Steve, this is what I've heard. I've heard that these are and sometimes it's literally miscommunication, and then it goes super well and everyone is okay, but people just had a harder time sharing with each other. I think that's because some of that vulnerability and we're in this together wasn't happening at the beginning. So usually if those things happen at the beginning, that mitigates itself because they feel comfortable enough to say, hey, like, why are you doing it this way? Well, I thought that's what you wanted me to do. No, I said, oh, okay, whoops, recalibrate, move on. But sometimes it's just like, I know that's what you've expected. I thought I was okay with it. I'm not. Okay. You know what? Then when you make a parting, it's not terrible. It's like, okay, we've come to realize as adults that this was not the right thing for either of us. And how do we gracefully part ways? How do we do this mindfully and positively as best we can? It's never perfect. It's never comfortable. But if the person is coming to work and attempting to do their best and all those kinds of things, there's not this, like you said, I like the person. It's not a negative thing. So as long as you're really, try to be as transparent as you can, you try and part, there will be likely a challenging situation. But I hope that people, just like you shouldn't rationally just go, let's hire this person today. I hope you just go, let's fire this person today, because have some, think about it, like, and so I've always not liked that, hire fast, fire slow, or hire slow, fire fast. I'm always just like, this is a person, like this is an individual. This is, And that's what I always say too in the hiring process when people are waiting for perfection. I go, it's like buying a house, right? Everyone wants 10 out of 10. And we're not getting 10 out of 10 unless we have lots and lots and lots of money or loads and loads and loads of time. And we don't have either of them. So are we getting 7 or 8 out of 10? Are we compromising on the neighborhood? Are we going to tile the bathroom? Are we going to paint the kitchen? Like, what are we doing here?
Right.
And that's what the organization who's doing the hiring needs to understand is this individual we know doesn't have every aspect of the role because they actually haven't done it before. So what are we willing to carry the load for a little bit of time to get them there, to get them into that 10 out of 10, if you will, right?
Mhm.
So, because you're going to have to manage that. And I always say that to a client, like, you're going to have to understand that they don't have all of the pieces. And our job is to give them an option. Here's 4 or 5 individuals. As you can see, this person is stronger on this side. This person's stronger on that side. So what do you think as a group you can navigate for them and give them the grace to get there, right? That first 6 to 12 months. And when I position it that way, everyone usually goes, okay, right. We can't expect them to know everything about this job in the first day. It's impossible, right? And as long as everybody walks in, it usually will go well. But usually what happens is people assume that they would be comfortable with something, either the hiring leader or the person accepting the role, and then they weren't. It's not the culture. It's not the alignment. It's not the type. It's not for me. It's not for me.
Interesting. Yeah. And then and then a respectful parting of ways. But it shouldn't really come as a surprise, right?
Usually it doesn't.
It should,
Usually
like,
it's almost like a grateful thank you for letting me go because I can't do
Yeah.
it.
You should be having conversations right up until
Well, that's why I
point.
say firing, when people say fire fast, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If it's not going, if there's something now, hey, we all have had situations where, whoa,
Well, for sure.
that's not on, right? That's not
Yeah.
on. We can't do that. And it's just there's what I call deal breakers. Somebody
Yeah.
does something that's a deal breaker. There's but usually you're surprised as the employer, like, what the heck? How did I miss that? Do you know what I mean? And go from there. So, I would say to you that there's a combination, of different things that have to happen. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Denise just jumped in there, just like performance review, they should never be surprised. That's a fail on the leader's part. Yeah, exactly.
100%. My business partner always says, in our organization, if we have to let somebody go, it's actually our failure. It's our failure for either not seeing what we should have seen in the process of recruiting somebody, or not setting appropriate expectations, or not providing enough training, or not having the right, transparent conversations, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
I think there are occasions where some people are surprised, but they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be. Yeah.
Sometimes there's some self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
And we've all had those too, I would say. But you're right, Denise, like 100%.
So it's what time is it? It's about 5 past the hour here, 5 past 12 in beautiful Mountain Time. I know we got people from across the continent. So, but it's about 5 past the hour. We got about 10 minutes left, and I would invite anybody who cares to or wants to just unmute themselves and make artists sweat with a hard question, or me, as the case may be. But I prefer making other people sweat with hard questions. But you can challenge her on her affinity for hockey teams, or you can do whatever you like. So I know.
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
Todd's in the HR business. I'm not sure about everybody else as to the difficulties. What is the part of the boss organization, and what? Sorry, Todd, can you just unmute
So that
yourself?
was my question. As we think about, a new leader who's having difficulties or challenges, part of it is, and just echoing what Artis was saying, it's the assessment of, okay, so where's the gap? Where's the issue? And then what part of that is mine as the boss, or what part of that is ours as the organization? And then what part of that is the new leaders? And understanding who owns what part might be a good path forward towards success. Yeah.
That's a great point.
I mean, that's it. Like, I think at the end of the day, sometimes there's things that you say when the individual goes, well, I expected this. And you go, that's just not possible. right?
Yeah.
It just isn't. And it's not that it's bad, it's just not possible. And then they actually have a decision to make. Well, then I guess this isn't for me, right?
Yeah.
Because there are some things, we can't be all things to all people. It's impossible. Like you can't. And so if there's something that they're struggling with the work or with the dynamic of the team or whatever it is, and we just can't compromise on that. I'm sorry. That's always been there. And if you were unaware of that, I apologize, whatever that is. But
Right.
there are times where at the end of the day, you can't meet in the middle always. It's not possible. And
That's so
so,
interesting.
I think that's very fair. I think that's a very fair
Yeah,
point.
yeah. And it's like, how do you get and I just asked the question, it's like, your question, Todd, I think is predicated on a level of self-awareness within the organization or the hiring person, that they are aware of their shortcomings in this conversation too, right? So this maybe an opportunity for some organization within internal organizational sort of coaching around how do you get to solve that problem, like bring in your HR team or your senior people in to kind of figure this piece out. I see Denise has her hand up. Very polite, Denise, thank you very much. Is this a shot about Vancouver or Edmonton or?
No, certainly not. No. I try to be a graceful loser. You just got to switch allegiance quickly.
Quick, yeah.
Yay, Edmonton's Canadian. That's it. Thank you so much for what you've been sharing with us, Ardis. You've explained something to me that happened 20 years ago. So early on when I currently work for one of the health authorities in British Columbia, and I work in project management, mostly construction and renovation. And so the teams I work with are usually created teams just for that project, whether we're talking consultants or contractors and such. But a lot of this hiring stuff definitely applies. Like, is this going to be a good fit, even if it's only for a period of time? Totally. But anyway, 20 years ago, I was learning about hiring from the HR manager of a tech firm I worked for. And we did 2, but not 3 things before we hired this person, and it didn't end up working out. And you identified the 3rd thing that we didn't do. So we had this, speaking of evaluations, we had this sort of standardized, I want to say English comprehension test. It was an odd thing, but anyway, it was a basic English comprehension test. And we used that because, we used that for communication purposes. We wanted to have at least a certain level of communication. We were hiring for a senior software engineer. So this is a highly technical and competent person. And they aced this. No one had ever aced this. They aced it. So we would administer the tests as the HR team. And we're like, wow, that's amazing. And of course, they had met with the person they would be reporting to. And they were incredibly impressed with the person's competence, confidence, experience. Great. We never had them connect with or interact with the people they'd be working beside. And he was a brilliant man. And as my boss at the time said, there's no such thing as a bad job or a bad employee. There's a bad fit. And that's what we got here. And he went on to run his own firm because he's an entrepreneur. He is not a team guy. He was so not a team guy. But the 2 things we did not reveal that. And I don't think there's any way it would have. So thanks for explaining something that happened years ago.
No, that's good. And it's always, I always say, who's going to, I shouldn't say that, who's going to touch the candidate? Like, you know what I mean? Like where does this position, touch, and how does it ebb and flow and all sorts of things, right? One thing I always do, which these are little things that tell you a lot. So I was doing a CEO position, height of COVID. The board wanted to meet in person, and candidates some of them had to travel. We were in this massive, like, it was huge. I don't know, you could probably fit like 50 people in this room, and there was like 8 of us. It was hilarious. But we're distant. They really wanted a presentation, and I was like, please, can we not do a slide deck, because I'm tech support, because we're not allowed to have any more staff in the room. Like, and as you saw me getting on this today, I am not tech support. But I didn't win, so we had to do this. And we had 2 candidates come. And of course, inevitably, it didn't work. Something happened. And I'm quietly trying to work with the candidate, and then the EA was helping me, or a mass. It's just a gong show, you know, it's just awful, right? And we're all stressed out. And and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. And this candidate was rude to me in this process. She didn't think people could really see. The EA observed it, right? And then anyway, I said, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to just go with the flow, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is, you know, this is the life. And it was like Jekyll, Hyde, you know, went to the position, did all this and interview and everything like that. We broke for lunch, and then we had the next person come in. Same thing happened to that person. I found out after the fact that they had given me the wrong cord. So it wasn't my fault, but IT had given me the wrong connection or whatever. So that's why it wouldn't work. This person was like, it's okay. Like, she was comforting me. It's not your fault. We don't know what's wrong. I have handouts. It'll be just fine. Turned around and did her thing, was pleasant, whatever, la, la, la. And in the debrief, that was the most poignant thing that the board saw. They said how she treated you when she thought nobody was looking, was so telling. And so I always say to people, I always ask my admin assistant, who greets candidates before an interview, how were they? I just ask her, you know, she's great. How were they? And she'll be like, oh, I learned this, or they told me about this, or whatever. Or I think they were really nervous. Were they okay? Like, she cares. She's so empathetic. You know, whatever that is. And there are some that are dismissive. And if you're not, oh, I don't think they're observing this, that is very telling, right? And so there's all these moments in time that I always say in a process, because it's how you are when you don't think this is part of the process. But it was a really, like, it was funny because it was the EA to the board chair who spoke up, and she said, I was just appalled at how they would talk to artists. She's so nice. Why would they?
That's so interesting.
Said, you know, and I try to have grace, like, it's stressful and all of these kinds of things, but in an executive role, crises happen all the time. So if you can't, this wasn't a crisis like this, you know, I warned them. I said, I am tech support. It might not work. So come prepared. And the one did. She came prepared with handouts, and it was 1987 and everyone was happy, right? Like, you know what I mean? So those are the little things that you have to realize. Sorry, that was a long story.
No, that's okay. There's a great story about, and I know we're bumping up against quarter after, but there's a great story. I wish I could never remember who does this. I've heard it several times in different contexts, where there's somebody sets up a breakfast meeting with a new person that you're considering hiring, and he sits in the hotel lobby and is purposefully late to join the person in the dining room, and he watches how this person reacts through the room. And I'm not 100% sure this is the truth or not, but I've heard too that sometimes he actually instructs the staff to mess up the person's order to see how they respond. And so it's pretty contrived.
Yes,
yeah,
totally.
it's pretty contrived.
Social interaction. Like,
It's so interesting.
Dinner. You know, it is how you know, how people are in a social setting. You know, is important, right? How they're going to treat. And I will say that the pandemic has worn on everybody, and so patience is thin, and so it's hard, right? It's hard.
So listen, we're at a quarter after the hour. We're going to wrap up the formal and shut off the recording. And if people have time or want to stay on for a bit more, that's super cool. But I want to thank Artis from the bottom of my heart. She's a great friend and somebody I've known for a long time, and she has not disappointed, certainly me, and I hope not you, for bringing this, her wisdom and thought about how do we make someone successful as we bring them into our organization. And because, quite frankly, as we've said several times, we're talking about a human being here and a life and family members and a lot going on when somebody gets hired. And there's a lot of emotion and fear involved with probably on all sides of it. So we want people to be successful because that's our job as leaders. And just to remind everybody that the Inner Circle will be in next, I think will be a Tuesday this time in the third weekend, I think the 18th of June. And we're going to talk about remote supervision. So if you're excited about that, boy, you'll be excited about that day. And again, as a part of our commercial for the day, our free commercial is that we want to thank the people at StephenArmstrong.ca for bringing this party to the play, and hopefully everybody got something out of it. And I would encourage everyone, if they're thinking about, needing an executive leadership coach or some organizational consulting or a speaker for an upcoming event, to reach out to the fine people at StephenArmstrong.ca. And we're going to shut off the recording, and take care and try to be kind to yourself. And if you got space and energy in these troubling times, be kind to other people around you too.
All right.
And go
Thank you.
Oilers.
Yeah. there
And
you
go Oilers for sure.
All right.